Hey everybody, we are looking at the book Unwrapping the Pharaoh, lesson number 21. And the title is Akhenaten and Nefertiti the Beautiful, okay? And we're going to start with talking about Amenhotep the Fourth, who technically is Akhenaten, but we'll get there in a little bit. So Amenhotep the Fourth, his grandfather was Thutmose the Fourth, and his grandfather hinted at a new emphasis on the worship of Aten, okay? And so it kind of started early with Amenhotep as far as, the worship of Aten. Then you have Amenhotep III, who is Amenhotep IV's father, and he fostered this idea of Aten as well, and he started cultivating this cult of the sun, and, he kind of continued to push the idea of his father, Amenhotep's grandfather, and eventually his father declared Amenhotep IV co-regent. This happened about 8 years before his death and encouraged his rule. And so it kind of gave some legitimacy to Amenhotep IV's rule. He gave him some experience as co-regent and went from there. So then there was this change that happens to Aten, okay? It was a moon, and then it changes to Aten. And this starts to happen in about the fourth year of the co-regency between Amenhotep IV and Amenhotep III. Eventually, around this time of the fourth year, Amenhotep IV comes right out into the open and declares his fidelity to Aten. He's not hinting around the bushes anymore. He's not doing anything else. He's saying, you know what, my loyalty is to Aten, in preference to all the other Egyptian deities. He did not immediately condemn the worship of Amun, but he kind of does, okay? So this is kind of the start of where there's some hostility that goes towards Amun. And remember, these are just Egyptian gods, but Amun at that point was probably the primary god of all Egypt. And Amenhotep is saying, the fourth is saying, you know what? No longer. We're going to change to Aten. And so he not only says this is what's going to happen, he does so with a major change in his own name. Amenhotep means Amun is satisfied. And he changes his name to Akhenaten, which means of service to Aten. He also changes to a new capital city called Akhetaten. He does this to get away from the influence of the priests of Amun who are there at Luxor. Okay? The location of this new capital is about halfway between Luxor and Memphis. Okay? There's a plain there. It sits on the Nile. On one side is the Nile, and the other side is a semicircle of hills. And Akhetaten, this new capital, means horizon of Aten. Eventually, after working on it and building it 2 years later, he moves his whole entire court there. He's changed his name, he's changed his capital city, all reflecting his desire to please the god Aten. The city itself was a very well laid out city. Had the palace, the temple, the public gardens, a sacred lake, private houses, all the things you would want in a capital city. And it eventually gets known as Tel El Amarna. Okay, we'll talk some more about that later. The persecution of the god Amun was launched from there, okay? And this is where things take, we talk about some hostility. This takes the turn to just clearly we're trying to get rid of him. Temples are destroyed. That were built to Amun. Any inscription that has his name are altered or defaced. Statues are completely smashed. The name Amen was even chiseled out of his father's name, inscribed on the capital of Amenhotep's temple at Luxor, okay? So then you think, okay, who is this Akhenaten? Who is this Pharaoh Akhenaten? Well, the statues depict him as kind of grotesque, with an elongated head, thick lips, pinched cheeks, protruding abdomen, and very thick thighs. Some of the scholars claim that he had, Marfan syndrome, which I didn't know much about until, doing this, but it says it's from a defective inherited gene. But if you look at things, his father's statues were okay, so, give some little doubt to that. Also, other statues of his family and the courtiers have the similar features. So, if it was genetic, you might think, okay, his family members, but the viziers, the other courtiers, they shouldn't have the same thing, the same look that's going on. Other scholars say that maybe it was called this frolic syndrome. Frolic syndrome makes you impotent. We know that now. But Akhenaten had 6 children. And, scholars say, oh, maybe his wife cheated. Well, especially for a woman back then, and a prominent woman, she may have been able to get away with cheating once, but probably not getting away with cheating 6 different times. So that again leads us to think that probably not the case here. So if it's not one of these syndromes, what could it be? Some scholars believe it was as a part of a new art form, and this art form eventually becomes known as Amarna art, based on the Tel Amarna area. And Akhenaten, we know, was very much into art, okay? He had a guy named Beck, who was his chief sculptor, and he wrote that Akhenaten taught him style and technique of art. We also know that Akhenaten was a brilliant scholar. He had a very innovative mind, and he was one of the few pharaohs who could write the complicated hieroglyphic script. And he wrote several beautiful hymns to Aten. So there's some belief and truth to the fact that maybe this is just a new art form. And some of the Amarna art features are these. They depict people with both a right hand and a left hand, and right feet and a left feet. Up until this point in time, all of the art that we see in Egypt, the people had 2 left hands or 2 left feet. And eventually, shortly after Akhenaten, it goes back to only having 2 left hands and 2 left feet. So there's more belief that this is a new art form, and the features on the statues and the reliefs and things are because of this new art form. When we start talking about Akhenaten personally, scholars show that he had some very good qualities. He had religious convictions, okay? Even though, most of the history up until this point of Egypt was with Amun, he strongly believed in his belief to Aten, and so he defied traditions to pursue his own religious beliefs, okay? There was vast improvements over worshiping everything. He was like, we're not going to worship everything, we're just going to worship primarily one God. And there was some talk about he was, monotheist, but that's not exactly true. He also, under his good quality, was a family man. He was devoted to his marriage to Nefertiti. The reliefs show them very close and very affectionate. He also had 6 daughters, and these reliefs show him as well very, very close and very affectionate. There was one relief, there was an inscription on it that says that the king wrote, quote, "My heart is pleased with the queen and her children. May old age be granted to the great queen Nefertiti, and may old age be granted to her children." So he really did love his family. And year 12 of his reign is the last time, though, that we see the royal families depicted as being together. And that gives us some concern about what happened at that point. We talked a minute ago about, was he a monotheist? There's a lot of debate in your book, and feel free to read that. And ultimately, though, some scholars want to claim that he's the first monotheist. That's not true. Even though he was hostile to Amun, he was, relentlessly opposed to Amun and the worship of Amun. He allowed the worship of other gods. Osiris was one of the big ones he allowed. He also worshipped some cobras and some other minor gods in Egypt. And so, you can get into that debate if you want or not. That's up to you, but that's all I'm going to say about it. So this area now is known as Tel El Amarna, right? That's where it gets its name for the Amarna art. And so what happens when we start excavating the area? Okay, you have a man named Ludwig Burckhardt, and he was a German Egyptologist, and he's in charge of the excavations of this area. He gets permissions and starts to dig in these areas. In 1907, he was given the initial permission, but no serious digging started until around 1911. Then in 1912, we have some major things that happen, okay? In 1912, they found a workshop of the sculptor Diotimus, okay? He was found in this workshop. They find unfinished stone heads and busts of the Amarna royals. There's a large number of kind of plaster masks that are found in there. There's also, they find in there the head of Nefertiti. This was found December 6, 1912. It is still currently one of the most beautiful statues that has ever been found in Egypt. But it was hidden from the authorities, okay? There was a man named Gaston Maspero, who was a Frenchman. And at the time that they found this in 1912, he was the head of the Egyptian Antique Service. Burckhardt kind of knows what he found, but he also knows there's a lot of kind of garbage relics, if you want to call it. A bunch of broken stuff, a bunch of other missing pieces, nothing real significant in there except for this bust of Nefertiti, this head of Nefertiti. So he calls up, he talks to this Maspero and he invites him out to Amarna, but he plays it down really good. He's like, we found a bunch of stuff, and basically he says to him, it's not very remarkable. We didn't find, most of what we found is not really very remarkable. It's just kind of broken pieces, and he really plays it down. So Maspero basically thinks that he's too busy, so he's not going to bother to go look at something that is just not very remarkable. So instead, he sends one of his subordinates out to look at it. And your book says this. It says, Maspero swallowed the story and sent an Egyptian deputy for the occasion. The deputy selected a few heads for the Egyptian Museum and authorized the rest of the discoveries labeled, quote, baskets of clay shards and many limestone fragments to be shipped out of the country. And then Nefertiti sailed for Berlin. Okay? So basically, Burckhardt got away with it. Okay? So the head of Nefertiti gets sent to Germany, where it's basically hidden until around 1924. And then they claim, well, the delay of notifying you and the announcement of us having it was delayed because of World War I. And there may have been, a sliver of truth to that, but basically, they're trying to hide this and make sure they can keep it. The Egyptians, of course, once they find out, immediately demand it be returned to Egypt. But Burckhardt claims, no. We went through Maspero. We had an agreement, and you need to take it up with Maspero. Unfortunately, Maspero had died at that point, and so there's no real way to figure it out, and the Germans keep it. So the Egyptians, still don't like this, and so they ban all German excavation for an indefinite period of time in all of Egypt. Semi-recently, the ban is lifted and German workers are allowed back into Egypt and doing some excavation, but Egypt is still demanding that the head of Nefertiti is returned to them. Which is very interesting, and as they should, right? But as we said, we talked about Akhenaten being a family man, and he loved his wife. But then there was, like I said, some mystery surrounding this, because after a certain number of years, all mention of the family stuff kind of disappears. Nefertiti suddenly disappears from all the records. Is she dead? Did she fall into disgrace and move? There's some theories. Did she die? Well, there's no inscriptional record of her death, and there's no evidence that she died during this time period. Was she banished? Well, she could have possibly fallen into disgrace with the pharaoh, but during this time period, he had a giant palace built for her at the other end of the city. And, not to be rude, but during that time period especially, there was better ways to banish females. He could have literally just had her killed. He could have, done several other things with her. The other theory, and kind of the ruling theory, is that she became Pharaoh herself. That maybe Akhenaten was the one who died, or maybe she just usurped his power and became the Pharaoh. She definitely achieved equality with Amenhotep, Akhenaten. Um, she surpassed her husband in importance. There's a true imbalance in the pictorial prominence in favor of Nefertiti. Some of the things we find, there was 329 kind of pictures of prominence for the king and 564 for Nefertiti. She also is depicted as a warrior in smiting roles in different statues, which would lead you to believe that she may have had more power than we thought. Regardless, it's just a mystery, and we're not exactly sure what has happened with it and what's going on. But unfortunately, there is hardly anything left of Akhenaten's beautiful city. After his death, it was abandoned, and Egypt returned to the worship of the god Amun and all the tributary gods. The stones of his city were pillaged for buildings by later pharaohs, and little remains of the palaces of Akhenaten and Nefertiti for tourists to see. So, I'm not sure we'll ever know exactly what was happening with that, but it's a very interesting story. Thanks.